Yeah, George and Lorraine would have gotten married, but instead they would have ended up as the dead bedroom marriage, as I realize now. That's what Back to the Future came out 40 years ago this month. Today I wanted to talk about some cultural things I noticed in it when I was rewatching it, and a little bit about part two. Not gonna bother with part three, which I'm rewatching tonight as I record this on Tuesday the 8th, because, well, most of it takes place in the Old West, so it's really not a whole lot to talk about, because 1885, that was still a time when most people lived a life similar to that of their parents, compared to, heck, even 85 to 55, 55 to 85. The change wasn't huge. Whereas going from 85 to the real world 2015, and heck, even from real world 2015 to real world 2025, there are such drastic changes that almost no advice of old is really applicable. But before I get into all that, be sure to give this video a like, comment what you think about this along the way, whether you think I'm reading too much into it, or if you think that Back to the Future really does reflect culture of 1985 and 55. Because you see, this is what I like about movies and TV, especially watching older ones, is they're like a time capsule. You can really get a feel for the culture of the time. So, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel Zillennial Nexus, cultural commentary from a man caught between generations. Alright, so if you haven't seen Back to the Future, spoilers for a 40-year-old movie, Marty travels from 1985 to 1955, where he encounters his parents at that age. His age. Marty's 17 in 1985, and then 1955. His parents are 17. Yeah, one of the things I noticed when I was watching part one is that there was a better sense of community in 1955 compared to 85, with the fracturing being dialed up to 11 if it was made today. So, if Back to the Future took place in 2025 and Marty traveled back in time to 1995, he would see that the fracturing of community would be a lot more pronounced. Yeah, at least in 1985, Marty had a girlfriend, and he was literally about to go on this big camping date with, what was her name? Jennifer. Yeah, that's her name. Obviously, if it was made today, it would be a lot different because most people don't date in high school. I actually kind of realized that George McFly is pretty much a Zoomer transplanted into a 50s high school. I mean, think about it for a moment. If relatively few high schoolers date compared to back in the 50s, when that was the norm, if not entirely expected, basically, George McFly was the original Zoomer Man. You know, I actually had a good laugh when I noticed that he said the reason he didn't want to go to the dance is because my favorite TV program is showing. I'll miss it. Which he would not be able to just DVR or watch it whatever time he sees fit because that technology simply wasn't available. But yeah, it was just a funny thing I noticed. What I really noticed about the design of Hill Valley was the how run down 1985 Hill Valley was compared to 1955 Hill Valley, like the town square, where the courthouse is, or whatever the clock tower is, the one that gets struck by lightning on November 12th, 1955 at 10:04 p.m. Yeah, that one. You can see a lot about how you can see the cultural degradation from 55 to 85. When you see the setup of 1985, what you really need to look for is the movie theater. Texaco, what was it? The diner place. That's one way to look at it. I don't remember too much about that in 1985, but in 1955, I can tell you it was definitely more of a community meeting place, an actual third place where all the high schoolers hung out and did all the 50s teenager stuff. Whereas, if you really want to see the degradation from 55 to 85, just look at the movie theater. So in 85, you'll notice that it's a triple X adult film theater. I'm just going to leave it at that because YouTube won't like if I get into too much detail. Now, when Marty goes back to 1955, I noticed that it's an actual movie theater that is showing proper Hollywood films and not adult films, like the kind that you would find on the Hub. Yeah, seeing the movie theater become the adult film theater really shows the cultural decay of Main Street from 55 to 85. Now, jumping to the second movie for a minute, I noticed in their version of 2015, it had what was it? Had the holographic shark for Jaws 19, where Marty marked, the shark still looks fake. Which I guess it went back to being a proper movie theater, like for Hollywood movies. Yeah, I can't really speak for what that reflects because Back to the Future Part 2 came out 26 years before 2015, so you let me know in the comments if you think there's anything to read into, but it's just an interesting thing I noticed. Maybe they were like, well, society would clean up main streets like that by 2015. Plus, there's not really a good reason to have adult film theaters around by 2015 because by real world 2015, the hub existed and people did not have to leave their houses to go to theaters that showed adult films. So that's probably why it went back to being something that predicted the megaplexes, the modern movie theater, where instead of it being this one building that had two theaters on either side, it's now like a double digit number of auditoriums. Like most of you who go to the movie theater, you know that there's like a double digit number of theaters. The one I usually go to has 15 screens total. So yeah, there's that. Another interesting thing I noticed is that, oh, if the past took place in 95 compared to 55, I'm pretty sure even then something like George and Biff eh, George and Biff's rivalry would get them both banned from the dance. I know for a fact that if it took place in real world 2015, like say there's some version of Back to the Future that takes place in Marty is from 2045 and travels back to 2015. George and Biff would definitely just be banned from the dance entirely at the first sign of conflict in the cafeteria. Trust me, I speak from experience as someone who has, as a former American high school student. Yeah, I noticed how George and Biff were treated rather, they weren't disciplined as harshly for that, whereas first sign of trouble with that, they would have been suspended. I'm just going to leave it at that. Another thing I noticed is that 55, there's no way that if this movie were made today, if it were set in 95, the past part, that Marty would have been just brought into the Baines house to be taken care of after being hit by Lorraine's dad's car. Instead, he'd be rushed off to the emergency room. I'm just gonna leave it at that, and there's very little likelihood Lorraine would have actually met Marty or George in the original timeline. But speaking of that original timeline, I actually had Grok make a list of events of how everything went without Marty's interference. So basically, the original timeline, George and Lorraine would have met. They would have been an awkward pair at the Enchantment Under the Sea dance, and then it would have taken 30 years for Doc to make the flux capacitor. Yeah, George and Lorraine would have gotten married, but instead they would have ended up as in the dead bedroom marriage, as I realize now. That's what it is, having seen the movie in 2011, 14, 21, and now 25. Yeah, that's the best way to describe it. A dead bedroom marriage. But I think I'm getting too far off topic. I think what I'm really trying to say is that Back to the Future represents the last part of human history where your life would be very similar to that of your parents' life. Compared to Real World 2015 to begin, and then moving beyond that to now Real World 2025, where thanks to the internet, smartphones, and other advances, yeah, life is very different compared to when my parents were my age. So I'm now the same age that my mom was when I was born. I can tell you right now, it is nothing like what it was back then, thanks to the internet, smartphones, everything I just said. I think you get the idea at this point. But yeah, back when my mom was my age, there was very little of that stuff, and then, well, her life at that from that point forward would have gone similarly to that of my grandmother, comparatively speaking. But let's go to focus on Marty's age group. So I was actually a teenager in high school when Real World 2015 occurred, and that's the year I graduated. Yeah, I can tell you right now it was much different from 1985. Not just because of more advanced cars, earlier versions of smartphones, and the emergence of smartphone culture. It was also the fact that high schools are a lot stricter about things like that. Like I said, if George and Biff fought like they did in Real World 2015, uh, they would very much be suspended, banned from the Enchantment Under the Sea dance, and okay, I think I've gone on too long about that, so I'm gonna leave it here for the video, except for one more thing I noticed. Robert Zemeckis was only a decade off with brain rot in part two. Something I noticed with part two, Marty Jr. literally put on like 8 channels at once, similar to the hyper stimulating content like Subway Surfers clips, the Family Guy clips, person talking. Yeah, that was just something interesting I noticed that I wanted to bring up before I leave it here for the video, as I am doing at this point. So let me know in the comments down below if you think I'm reading too much to this, or if you agree it's a reflection of the culture of the time and how much closer we are to, or just how far off Robert Zemeckis was from his version of 2015 compared to where we are now and where we probably will be. I doubt flying cars will ever be a thing. Too much of a regulation hassle, not to mention, you don't want just anyone to get a pilot's license. Give this video a like, subscribe for daily videos of cultural commentary from a man caught between generations, and I will see you soon.